Hello and welcome everyone to our holiday edition of State of Cybercrime, End of Year Exploits and 2023 Predictions. I'm your host, Matt Radilak, Senior Director, Incident Response and Cloud Operations at Varonis, and I'm joined by our co-host, Mr. Gibson. You'll want to say hello.
Hey there, everybody. David Gibson, SVP of Strategic Programs here at Varonis. Hope everybody's gearing up for a good holiday season.
So, we'll go through our usual segments today, though. There is a little bit of holiday flair that I'll have to talk about in just a second here or so. What we'll go through, is there any good news to see if anything good has happened in cybersecurity recently? We'll jump on the highway to the danger zone and think about any potential threat actors, exploits, or vulnerabilities that might be top of mind. We'll talk about one very vulnerable vulnerability that hopefully you know about and you're not finding out on today's webinar. And then we'll go into a little bit of predictions, both from our hosts as well as from a very, very popular robot that I'm sure none of you are going to guess which robot made our last prediction. So in our first segment, we always like to cover good news. So often in cybersecurity, we hear the bad stuff, right? Actors, exploits, all the latest things that are going to cause the world to come crashing and burning down. Very rarely do we focus and spotlight on some of that good news. And so in the holiday spirit, David, will be anyone spending this holiday season in handcuffs?
Well, it looks like we got one notorious leader of the Zeus Botnet gang arrested. His name is Vyacheslav Igorovich Pinchukov. That's easy for me to say, but more easy to refer to him by his pseudonyms Tank and Father. I'm not sure which of the three.
I was going to say, do you know which one it is? I think it's the one.
Three.
I'm going to suggest the one on the left.
I think the other two were created by ChatGPT, but I'm not really sure about that. But anyway, Zeus is a very notorious botnet, right? I mean, my wife had an old Windows box. I'm pretty sure she got hit with Zeus at one point as I watched her laptop broadcasting out all over the network. But this has been around for a while, right? Zeus botnet.
I feel like maybe more than 10 years. I feel like it predates us running this show, that's for sure.
Yeah, I promptly reinstalled her Windows 7 box with Linux, and then she never used it again, so it was good. But
where have I heard that before? Yeah. So I think there's another little bit of good news, and that is that 4 arrests were made in Australia as it related to a $100 million pig butchering scam. Now, for those of you that have never heard of this type of a scam before, this is a financial fraud act. So four Chinese nationals were arrested inside of Australia for coordinating this multi-million-dollar fraud ring where they were looking for fraudulent investments in what would otherwise appear to be pig butchering companies are investing in livestock and in the butchering and processing of livestock. Unfortunately, a lot of this was routed through cryptocurrency, and no one really saw that their investments yielded anything. And that's what really led to the arrests of these 4 in this particular scam. I think the more interesting thing to point out here is that a pyramid scheme or an investor scheme of the past, when you combine that with something like cryptocurrency that makes it really easy to take money or move money around or potentially siphon money off for illicit gains, you sort of see that those two things combining. And just to give us a look ahead, as we talk more later in the show about things that we predict, for me, I think we're going to see more of this cryptocurrency taking over fraud and fraud-based payments and different types of scams. We might even see some NFT scams that are coming up, and maybe we'll see more arrests. I predict that we probably will see more arrests moving into 2023 as well.
Yeah, but what sort of made me think about this one is the victims would go to the investment website, which made it look like all was okay. And if you think about like how you kind of make sure that your money is okay these days, if you go to it's like if somebody was messing with your bank application, how long would it take you to figure that out? So it's a pretty interesting twist there in terms of that scam. Also, had never heard of pig butchering before. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, when I first saw the headline, I thought it was actually about like you were investing in actual livestock and not just a a string of investments related to the processing of livestock. But it's probably it did catch my attention though. So the writer had the intended effect. So let's jump on into the danger zone. This is typically where we talk about different threat actors and cyber attacks that are happening that we think you should be aware of. And David, you were really passionate about everything that's happening at Twitter. I was able to help us kind of box in the content for today's show to be more about InfoSec and cybersecurity and less about the day-to-day running of the company. Though, you've got a little bit of runway here. Can you tell us what you kind of think brought to mind, or really like why are dangerous things happening over at Twitter?
Well, it sounds like certainly everybody's read about the tumult at Twitter, a lot of shakeups, a lot of people let go, and a lot of decisions made and then unmade in rapid succession. I'm not sure if Musk is going to agree to his poll and actually step down. I think that'll be, the next in a long series of somewhat unfortunate events, it looks like. But the offboarding gaps here, it looks like the GitHub repo is accessible to a lot of folks that are no longer with the company. Now, I'm not sure whether this was a conscious decision because the GitHub's mostly the open source stuff, and they decided to go away from the open source. But regardless, I think if you aren't paying close attention to making sure that when people leave the organization, all of the accounts that are tied to them are disabled or follow the process for offboarding, then you're going to end up with people that aren't in the company anymore having access to corporate data or organizational data, right? So for nonprofits and government stuff as well.
And I think this is like especially important. We often think and most organizations I speak to at least feel like they have very strong controls for like your AD account, this like thing that keeps you from logging into a corporate computer. But when we look and extend that same scrutiny to SaaS, this is often where things fall apart, especially what I would say is in these collaborative data stores, in places where you're able to add more people or change the permissions as a user. This is where it's much, much more likely that you're going to have an offboarding gap because, in this scenario, these repos were open, but imagine that they were private, but I had invited my Gmail to it already. Are you going through and removing all the associated identities with me in an offboarding situation, or are you just doing the other ones? I'd be curious to see if there's other areas in the chat where people feel like offboarding gaps commonly occur. Obviously we're talking about GitHub here or Slack. Curious to see if anybody else has any thoughts on that. Now, some of the people left Twitter as a result of this as well, right?
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting, this Mastodon, this concept of a decentralized autonomous organization, which I guess is, it kind of an interesting thing for social media. I've actually think that'd be a neat blend. I guess a DAO, or a decentralized autonomous organization, is one where they use blockchain to kind of record the decisions, right, and kind of make sure that you've got the integrity of those decisions. But it doesn't really have the traditional board and human structure, right? So this is something that's decentralized. I think it's an interesting approach here.
David, we were talking about how in March of last year I had went to Hawaii, and then you were bringing up how there was this data breach there that you thought that our viewers might want to hear more about. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found?
I just thought I saw these two combined. It was there's this company called Red Awning, which has like 20,000 vacation rental listings, with about 1,000 of them in Hawaii. And then it sounds like there was a third-party breach that had a ton, like 77,000 employees of Uber in it. So a compromised database there. And just putting these things away, it kind of made me think that maybe hackers want a vacation too. So I think that the interesting thing here is mostly that if you're planning on going on vacation in Hawaii and you're using an Uber, then you might be more at risk than you expected.
All right. Well, I think there was some other interesting things that happened as well for one North American grocery store chain. And what I wanted to point out in raising this incident, we think of grocery stores often as places where, in this case, Empire Co, the kind of the the parent company to Sobeys. Somebody, one of our Canadian colleagues in the chat wants to make sure we're pronouncing that correctly. They had breach costs $25 million above and beyond what was already paid for by cyber insurance. I think that's the really important thing to point out is we often think of cyber insurance as this policy, this umbrella policy that's going to cover us in the event of a breach. But what this points out is that sometimes the cost can go greatly above and beyond what your cyber insurance was able to cover. And this is a quite, when we think about, a grocery store chain having to shut down things like, processing of in-store payments or its pharmacy services, this has a direct impact to their customers and to their end users, in addition to the cost to the parent company empire. And so just something to think about, when you think of the cost of a data breach, it might often be more than just, your insurance premiums going up, but you may have additional costs beyond even that of what insurance covers.
Yeah, this it's interesting. This looks like a pretty rough ransomware attack in terms of the amount of damage and the amount of systems that were offline and the amount of kind of risks here. Is there a risk of like the food going bad because they couldn't, access the inventory systems to know when things need to be thrown out, that sort of stuff. Also read one article that mentioned it looked like it might be Black Basta ransomware, but I haven't heard that haven't heard that conclusively yet. But interesting story here.
Well, in our next segment, we typically talk about the most vulnerable vulnerabilities that are out there. And I'm curious if some of you have already started to think about or were guessing if we were going to cover this new Citrix Zero-Day and the Citrix ADC. Now, if I remember correctly, David, the ADC, it's like a load balancing component that sits out in front of other Citrix hardware.
Yeah, it's an internet-facing device. And it looks like it's got a vulnerability. So I think about this like any other vulnerability on any other internet-facing device, right? So, we've talked a lot about proxy logon, and the exchange vulnerabilities. We've covered a few of the firewall vulnerabilities here. I feel like this kind of falls into the same bucket. If you've got this, it's possible that this actor here has compromised the vulnerable system and then used that to get access to stuff behind it inside your network. And they, of course, released patches and some instructions on how to respond to this vulnerability.
I think it's really important to note that both the U.S. government as well as the Dutch government really advised against for urgent action in updating or disabling these gateways. If you're attending today's show and you haven't taken care of that yet, as badly as I want you to stay for the next 2 giveaways, probably want to get on this. That would be our recommendation, at least, as they have been out and being exploited for some time. And remember, when we talk about a zero-day, this is just the first time that we as industry found out about it. It's unknown or unclear how long APT5 might have been leveraging this vulnerability in the past before it was discovered and disclosed. And there is a patch available. Again, really, really important to point out. There's even some guidance from the NSA on how to search for and identify this. Maybe one of our co-hosts could take the link out of our slide deck and drop it in the chat. I know some of you are probably going to get that in the follow-up email from today's show as well, but we'll drop those links in the chat for you.
Yeah, and this runs through, it runs through kind of the most basic, moving the ADC behind a VPN that requires valid user authentication. It gives you instructions for how to do file integrity monitoring, how to hash the binaries there. It gives you some instructions to look at procstat and see if there's been any change to the output of that might be suspicious. Also, some URL signatures. It looks like this might be, they've named it TrickLancer, I think, is the malware that comes with this, and then also instructions to look at NSLog, which I guess, Matt, is like the syslog for
That's
Citrix.
Right. Yeah, for that gateway. Yep. Now we're on to hopefully something that everybody is passionate about, which is predictions. Now would be a great time if you want to throw in the chat what your predictions are for cybersecurity and cybercrime in 2023. We absolutely want to read them. We're going to go through our 3, although I should say we're going to go through the 3. 2 were made by humans. 1 was made by a robot, and then give you a chance to see which one of these predictions was made by a robot. So let's crack right into it.
Yeah, so the first prediction, artificial intelligence and machine learning will continue to be increasingly integrated into cybersecurity systems, allowing for more efficient detection and prevention of cyber threats. We have a little bit of experience with that, I would say, Matt. What do you think about this prediction?
I feel like when we take AI and ML and we combine them together, and it's good, right? If you put bad data in, you're probably going to get, bad AI out. But when you combine that with good automation, I think that's what we're going to see is really the next phase in the cyberspace, is moving from, a lot of kind of purely dictionary and threshold based style alerting or signal signature alerting to combining things and, applying like an ML toolkit to say, even a predictive ML toolkit to say, yeah, if this behavior continues, it's going to be really bad. It's going to look like this threat actor, which is just going to allow us to get better in reducing time to detect and time to respond.
And yeah, it makes sense to me. I would say if you were an AI and you were making this prediction, you might be a little narcissistic. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if this one was the robot or not, especially with how passionate one of us is about this topic. Now, what about this second one?
Well, so as more data is processed by applications and services in Amazon, Microsoft, and Google Cloud environments, security professionals will spend more time scrutinizing security processes and controls in these environments. Well, it kind of makes sense. It almost, to me, seems like we're moving back to the mainframe days, where you've got like one system or three systems in this case that's really accessed by all the other computing devices, right? Which are becoming more and more like caches to these environments, I think, as well.
And I think when we think about like the data processing moving out of our data centers and into common service provider data centers, this really speaks to something we talked about on previous episodes, which is like in SaaS, there's still a lot of security that needs to happen, even though the data center side of security is taken care of by the other company. And when we think about cloud security, that really is what it boils down to, is understanding where in that shared responsibility matrix this particular application or service lies, and what security is on you versus on the service provider, and just not making any assumptions. This one was pretty good, a little robot-y, but I'm curious to see what our audience thinks. Now, what about this last one?
I think this is interesting. Ransomware groups will threaten the other pillar of security, integrity. There's a story already where there's a ransomware group that's moving a little bit more quickly by only encrypting parts of the files. And it's like just enough to make the files unusable. And it just occurred to me, the ransomware started, I think, by threatening the availability, right? Threatening your local laptop, encrypting files on file shares, quickly moved on to the 1-2 punch, right? Where they were threatening to leak the data. So kind of the confidentiality pillar of security. So confidentiality, availability, and then integrity is the next one. And it's frightening to me to think of all the different applications of, hey, all of your diagnoses in your hospital, they've been switched around. You're not going to know which one.
Yeah, or your financial records, your accounting, your books, we just changed everything. And if you want to know by how much and where, you're going to need to pay us to get it back. I think this is a little bit more of a, let's call it a hands-on approach to ransomware, as opposed to some of the set and forget ransomware that we've been seeing in the past. But an interesting prediction. One, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it was probably made by a person, but let's see what our audience thinks. Was the first prediction, the AI and machine learning being integrated into cybersecurity systems? The second one, security professionals spending more time scrutinizing processes and controls and large cloud service providers? Or the third one related to ransomware moving on to integrity? Which one was made by ChatGPT as opposed to which one was made by humans?
I'm curious.
While we're kind of letting this curate, I want to read out a couple of really good predictions that came in the chat. One, and again, just for those viewers that might be catching up just right now, these are prediction suggestions from our viewers. One was that the central government in the UK will be crippled by the Moab, the mother of all breaches. That's an interesting one. Another one, which was more state-sponsored ransomware. I think what's interesting is if we had a time machine segment where instead of doing predictions for 2023, we looked back at our predictions for 2022 and asked if they were correct. One of our big predictions for 2022 was more state-sponsored ransomware, in the sense that it was a state-enabled, as I call it, where the state said, oh, crime family, here's this amazing ransomware toolkit that you might want to use to carry out ransomware attacks. And here's 4 or 5 people that you might want to consider recruiting into your ransomware ring. I think we're going to see more of that as it really leads to like market disruption and chaos and just the general kind of like economic non-prosperity. And so I do predict more state-sponsored ransomware. A couple of people had a lot to say about the quality of phishing emails alongside of using deep fakes in phishing. I think that's probably something that the Twitter sphere and LinkedIn have really been blowing up about, which is how ChatGPT is going to be the thing that makes phishing emails not have typos.
Yeah, I was just going to say we got our poll results here. If you want me to break it to them.
Yeah, you got to tell them that first before you do this though. And I knew this going into today's show. I didn't think that this was the bot. I think that this means that secretly David is also a robot. But let's go ahead and tell him which one was made by the robot and which one wasn't.
I wrote 2 and 3.
Yeah,
and number 1 was the robot.
And I'm just going to go back for our audience here. I think this one was the one that was written by the robot, and that maybe David was confused and this one was the one that he wrote. But according to David, this was the one that was made by ChatGPT. So now let's look at the last few predictions that came in. One, we think that the electrical grid will become more targeted by low sophistication in order to disrupt data centers. Now, I wonder if this viewer knows about what happened in North Carolina to Duke Energy recently, where it appears as though a power substation was shot up. Now, that's not quite a cyber attack, but it is an attack on critical infrastructure. And I guess, I bet that classifies as low sophistication as well, or 2 substations. Thank you. And then the last one, this was one of my favorites. Skynet will achieve full awareness and begin to take over critical systems.
I asked ChatGPT whether it was Agent Smith, or it was like Agent Smith, and not that it's Skynet, but Skynet would be a good parallel question to ask, and the answer was pretty startling. So it has no corporeal form. It made sure to mention, so I felt a little better about that.
And one of our audience members asked if we had any updates regarding Log4j exploits. I would say that, in terms of the frequency at which me and my team, the Varonis IR team, do investigations into things that the root cause was Log4j, that has certainly trickled off. Vast majority of organizations have either implemented compensating controls or mitigations for their Log4j exposures. With that said, though, just as recently as last week, we were wrapping up a kind of a proactive assessment, like a cyber resiliency style assessment where we help an organization test their cyber resiliency. They did still have devices that were vulnerable to it that did allow us to kind of move into that kind of lateral movement and privilege escalation phase, because what they had done is they had remediated everything that was internet facing, but not everything inside of their environment. And so, I think it's important any zero-day or any vulnerability that you don't just think of your internal exposure or your external exposure, but also what your internal exposure is. Another question came in, which is, we have seen experienced domain name spoofing accompanied with smart spear phishing. Has anyone seen this?
I'm curious to see what the audience says. This is pretty scary stuff, right? It's the odds of somebody being tricked by a clever email that kind of checks all these boxes and gets through, it seems to get pretty high.
I actually have an interesting tidbit on this one, especially where it would be easy to add another letter. So think of a company, let's call them Giveaway Inc. And if you had 2 A's, 2 E's, or 2 I's in Giveaway Inc.'s, hopefully this isn't a real organization, but in their website, if you added another letter in there, it would be very easy to kind of trick someone into thinking this was a legitimate site or the legitimate domain. And if you combine that with, maybe knowing from someone's contacts list or a breach contact list, I mean, these do start to get into the very, quite effective or quite likely to be effective phishing campaigns. So now the last one, now I'm going to read this one out loud, though we might have to decline to comment on it, which is the new NFT trading card gimmick just a money laundering scam? I'm going to leave that question to be answered by, what do you think it would be, the FTC or the Department of Justice?
Can leave that as an exercise to the reader.
Yeah, we'll let our audience think about that one. And that's pretty much it. We do always, again, want to just shout out you guys, our audience, for making making the show possible. We had a great run with you this year. Hopefully we won't need to do an urgent session here before the end of the year, but if we do, we will be here. If we don't, we hope you guys enjoyed our holiday special, and we always appreciate your feedback. So if you guys wouldn't mind just participating in our feedback poll really quick before you leave, it would mean a lot to us. Thank you so much.